So good afternoon, and thank you everybody for taking the time out and joining today. This is the Real IT Bites Early Career Professional series. So this is essentially real people, real professionals with real stories, real career stories for you. This is the third in the 8-part series, so you might have missed the first two. The first one is business relationship management, and the second one is essential future competencies within IT. So I would encourage you all to really follow and watch the entire series, which will be available on YouTube on the BCS channel. So I'd like to thank the BCS for taking on my idea for this series. I think it's really important that we shed a light on some of the softer skills that are required and some of that diverse talent that's essential to the IT industry in really shaping what is becoming a very digital world, and a lot of companies are embarking on transformation. So the more sort of engaging talent we can get on board, the better, really. So thanks to the BCS and to David and Tom, who are the BCS Birmingham branch co-chairs. And I've also got two guests with me today. I've got Tom Gilbert and Sally Paul, who are from the Project Management Office at the Secure Trust Bank. So you want to say hi?
Hi everyone.
Hello everyone.
So we'll get started. I do have a slide for you, and it's just another one just to set the scene for you and give you some context on the subject today, which is the Project Management Office. And that's me. So my name's Jag Sohal. I'm an IT business partner. I've been in the IT industry for almost 14 years, and I work at NFU Mutual. So I lead a team, and the partnering role, which if you watch the first series back, you'll understand a bit more about what the partnering role entails. And we're really there to sort of really drive process improvement and culture change and things like that. So essentially the purpose of these series, as I said, it's to consist of real career stories. We're not really emphasising much on the theory, but really just to highlight some of the roles out there in IT that people potentially don't know exist within that IT ecosystem, and debunk any myths you might have around IT as well, especially if you're an early career professional. And you know, it's been an interesting year for a lot of people, and 2021, it could be just a bit of a fog hanging over you to think, you know, I'm just sort of leaving university or even college even, and to say, well, what should my next step really be? So hopefully these talks and some of the contacts, so we're all contactable on these talks as well, to really kind of help you and guide you in any way that we can. So we will dive straight in to the video. And I'd also encourage just a lot of chat and interaction. Do feel free to, if you can, just sort of flag that you want to, you know, you have a question, or perhaps after the video plays, which is an early conversation that I've had with Tom and Sally, do feel free to, you know, put the webcam and share your story, your query, or anything like that. So I'll find the video for you now. So hi Tom, hi Sally. I'm going to have a look. Right. Right, can you see that? Yeah.
It's not showing it.
How's it going?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Hope you're both well.
Good, thanks, yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
very well, thanks.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for joining me today and taking time out of your day to do this. So this talk is around the Project Management Office, and I think it's very important to shine a spotlight on this department within the ecosystem, which is IT, and some of the important work that you do. So as I said, I think the theory is kind of all out there in terms of Project Management Office, but it's really yourselves and your stories to say, well, how does it really work, and how you feel the real importance is. And then I'm happy to share some examples of how I think it's really been really vitally important to me in the role that I do. Let me just stop the sharing for 1 second, and hopefully I can share just the video with you. and some of the important work that you do. So as I said, I think the theory is kind of all out there in terms of project management office, but it's really yourselves and your stories to say, well, how does it really work, and how you feel the real importance is. And then I'm happy to share some examples of how I think it's really been really vitally important to me in the role that I do. So Tom, how would you describe your role within the organisation?
That's quite a broad question, but I'll try my best to answer it. I describe my role as probably being the centre of governance and structure for projects and change delivery across both IT and the business. So whether it's process changes or more kind of technical system changes, my role is kind of part of that central piece of making sure that it kind of aligns with our strategy and what we want to do as a business.
More kind of like day-to-day type
activities are kind of making sure that project managers got the right support and the right kind of coaching to be able to deliver these changes. So that's also a big part of the role, and kind of making sure that they've got all the right tools and skills that they need to be able to do it. So it's quite a broad range of things that you get involved in PMO.
Yeah, and it has to be broad, doesn't it? Because of not every change is the same. So changes, vary in scale and complexity and budget and things like that. So what you really have to do is make that assessment to then tailor the needs to make sure that whatever change we're about to embark on and deliver can be delivered at its best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot that goes into it in terms of capacity planning for the organisation, like can we
cope with this size of
change, working with suppliers as well. So it is a big role. We also do
stuff that kind of goes
noticed as well, I think, and Sally can cover some of these off in a second. Some of the things around financial management and that kind of stuff. So Sally, I don't know if you wanted to cover a bit of that.
Yeah, so I work for Tom, so I kind of do more of like the lower level kind of side of the job, I'd say. So things like the monthly finance process, looking at how much projects have spent against how much was forecast. If there's a difference, what's the reason for that difference? Are we still likely to spend in future months, or has that changed? Those kind of processes. Also around like risk reporting and tracking, making sure that risks and issues are being flagged at the right point, to make sure they're being flagged to the right level and being reviewed regularly.
things like that.
And also project plans, make sure plans are realistic, make sure that there are milestones identified, make sure plans are being updated. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in and around those kind of like
those activities that we need to keep monitoring.
So I think we can sort of describe PMO as just really that essential toolkit that businesses need, and obviously I think it's recognised within IT, but outwardly that the business really recognises the important role that you do, that they could never really have a team or a full-time person do one aspect of it. It's an entire toolkit of tools and practices and standards.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. I think Tom's kind of been with the bank a lot longer than me. I only started last year, so he's got that really valuable kind of subject knowledge as well. So he knows about all of the systems and the processes that the bank uses, so he can advise on kind of. He's got that overarching view, and he can advise different business areas on kind of different aspects. Whereas for me, I've come from utilities into the banking world, but actually the skills are transferable. So although I'm building up that sort of kind of subject knowledge, but at the moment, my kind of key value is around the skills that I've got in terms of financial, like we've discussed, and RAID management and project plans, etc. And just kind of the assurance kind of side of things, like the audit kind of trail, that kind of, those are the tools that I'm using at the moment.
And we're talking about really a role or an engine that is with the duration of a period of change as well, really. So you become quite invested in those projects and that whole portfolio as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the difference really between one of the big differences anyway between project managers and project management and that role and program management and that kind of stuff is that you tend to pick up things and it's quite temporary. So you come into an organization potentially, deliver a project or a change, and then you probably leave or go and do something different or work in a different team. So whatever change you delivered is kind of in the background. For us in PMO, we're kind of central to that. So we'll be there at the beginning, and we'll still be there at the end, and we'll still be there, you know, hopefully a long time after that change or project is delivered. So we know about the lessons. We know what went well, what didn't go so well. We can help future project managers with changes that are of a similar nature as well. And it's probably worth saying that, like, both Sally and I have been project managers in the past, which I think has helped. So we know the kind of barriers or things they're up against as that kind of role. And it also helps us to work with them as well, I'd say.
Yeah, I think some people perceive that you will go from PMO onto project management as it being kind of like a lower level job, and actually it's just a completely different skill set. You know, it's kind of on a par, but just a completely different discipline. And like we've kind of both prefer the PMO side because you do have that kind of helicopter view of everything.
Yes.
Whereas with project management, I found with my experience that a lot of it was waiting for people to do things. And I like to get things done. And I think with PMO, you can always be doing stuff. You can always be adding value yourself.
Yeah. I think it's, as you describe, that guiding light for project managers and those involved, because we know projects can get messy and heated and political. So you're there as that honest broker. You hold on to the facts, you know, and you gather those facts and you analyse them on behalf of the business. And essentially, what is IT there to do? To deliver value add change, to deliver, you know, positive outcomes. So you're sort of harnessing that mentality to say what we're doing is for the greater good. And like you said, the people involved in the project sometimes are temporary; they move on. But you're there making sure that you've got this overarching view. And you talked about variety. That must be quite exciting because there's lots of different ways to deliver projects now as well. You know, people talk about sprints and agile and things like that. So you really must get some really interesting insight in how projects are run either well or not so well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point, actually. So when I kind of started out in PMO, which is getting on for like unbelievably 10 years ago now, that's scary, isn't it? But at that time, there's very much a waterfall approach. So, you know, the Prince 2 kind of approach of delivering projects in phases and stages and making sure they were delivered in that way. But certainly over the past sort of 5, 6, 7 years, things have started to branch out. It's become a lot more acceptable to go down the route of sprints and agile delivery, Scrum teams, things like that. And that's something that experienced at Empower. We both experienced at Empower actually when we were there in the utility section. And that's really interesting. It's a really different way of doing things. And you can use both methodologies or more than one methodology to deliver projects and change effectively. And I think I'm really pleased that, especially the company we work for now, when we've originally started, there was a real perception that it's a waterfall process that we follow, and that's it. As maybe you've seen, and I think over time they've become more appreciative that you can deliver projects, you know, really in a really positive way by running with an agile delivery. I don't know if you feel the same, Sal, about that.
Yeah, I think there was initially a perception that kind of agile threw governance out the window, which would kind of make our roles redundant. But I think it's kind of come full circle, and people have realised that you definitely still need that governance underpinning any kind of delivery. And it might be just that the governance looks a different way. You know, we've started using Kanban boards, for example, for certain things. We're looking at retrospectives. We're looking at like cutting down business cases where we can deliver like incremental deliveries, but it's still all there. But you just kind of change the way you're working and you're tweaking it all the time, which means that you are continuously like building on that skill set and learning from experience, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and I think that key word there is experience. So for a young professional to now hopefully consider the world of project management office, which there's a wealth of roles in there. There's, you know, from the planning to being part of the finance, you know, team or governance and things like that. There's a wealth of roles and abilities and skills you can pick up there as well.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Yeah. I think anybody starting their career, it's a brilliant place to start because it does give you that insight into all of those areas, as well as like the strategic direction of the company.
Yeah, I think like I was obviously speaking for Sally here, but we both sort of didn't know about PMO when we started our careers. We didn't know about we're necessarily even focused on project management as a career path, but through getting involved in different things and having specific skill sets, you kind of end up in a position where actually this role or this area of the business fits quite nicely with you.
Yeah.
I started off just doing some investment planning as a bit of a side of my role that I was doing at the time, which also involved some risk management, and I ended up kind of moving into PMO that way. So it's not like either of us had at the beginning of our careers like this is where we want to go.
Exactly.
But it's great that those doors are there for you to kind of, you can see what sort of skills you've got and which ones work for you. And then there's always options for you, as you say. There's a variety, as you mentioned, Jag. There's all sorts of different roles that there are in PMO. It's not necessarily one specific thing that you need to be good at. So,
yeah. And I think it's because when we leave university or early careers, we're just hearing the key words of IT project manager or business analyst. We forget that there's just such a rich variety of roles and departments within IT as well. So
definitely.
I think that's absolutely key. I sort of talked about the fact that you get that helicopter view as well. So what an incredible place to be, where you're getting to see the direction where the business wants to go in the next 5 years in quite a clear, pen to paper kind of way, really.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, you're also party to kind of the decisions around prioritization, and you can steer decisions, and you can, like I said, use your expertise. Like Tom regularly kind of influences decisions and things.
Yes.
And that's the real value of what we do, kind of using what you've learned before, using previous experiences to kind of feed future decisions.
Yeah, because a lot of people across the business, and Jag, I'm sure you have this as like a relationship manager, people have these kind of wild ideas about projects or changes they want to make and things like that. And actually sometimes they just haven't thought them through enough. So if they go away and think about them and work them through properly, come back with something a bit more kind of rounded, a better idea of what they want to do, then we can help shape that. And that might be a really good project to do. But sometimes people just need that bit of support and coaching and guidance on how to pull together a project or an idea so that it has got benefits, it has got an idea of cost and can be approved. But the strategic helicopter view is a really nice position if you can get into that as a PMO. I think perception of the PMO has changed over time. I think we were originally viewed, if you go back maybe 10, 15 years, it was very much like, the PMO is there to support the project manager. They'll arrange meetings, they'll take minutes and things like that. I think they've realized the value of PMOs over the years.
Yeah,
things
definitely.
have moved on. So.
Definitely. And I think another key element of the role is kind of interpersonal skills. You need a lot of the time you're asking people for things when they're short on time. They might not see the importance of it themselves. So you need to be able to speak to people and communicate in a way that isn't going to annoy them, to be honest, and that you're going to get what you need from them, because you're usually quite regularly collating a lot of information, and that needs to be kind of reliable information from people that haven't got a lot of time. So I think if you've got strong interpersonal skills, again, this job is for you, I think.
That sort of goes nicely into the fact that we haven't talked about anything overly technical about this role. So I feel like an individual, a young professional coming in, doesn't really need to have an IT background per se. We're actually talking more about the interpersonal skills, and then some of those more specific abilities. Perhaps it is using a tool, perhaps it is using a certain spreadsheet. They can be learnt along the way. What you essentially have to do is build those relationships with members within IT, but also those key business stakeholders, sponsors. Definitely. And like I said, they're all looking for yourselves to make sure that the project is done to a standard and delivered in a way that it was all worth it. That investment was all worth it. So
yeah, I think companies have different views on what's important as well. So Sal and I both work for a bank, and they're very much about regulation and making sure that
Yes.
we're keeping risk to a low level. So that's the main consideration for that organization. When I worked at other places like Virgin Media, it was very much more about, hey, it doesn't really matter how much it costs, but let's just get out the best quality thing that we can deliver, as far as this project's concerned. And all the kind of stuff that's wrapped around it, like the governance and regulation, was kind of almost like not as important as let's get the final product out. That was what was important. So different organizations have different views on what's important, as you'd imagine. So but that's quite exciting to work in different remits where those kind of things are being delivered. That's good. That's a good space to be in.
Yeah, and like you said, it's transferable from organisation to organisation and from role to role. You might see that you've been spending so much time with a program manager or a project manager that you want to become part of that training scheme that organisation might have. It's a really good step in. You talked about the importance. Have you been to organisations perhaps where they've not recognised the importance of PMO?
Sal, do you want to cover that? Or?
I think, in all fairness, I think kind of Tom alluded earlier to say that perception changed over time. I think at a previous organisation, it was initially very much regarded as an admin role, but then the PMO were actually graded at the same level as project managers, and that made a massive difference. And our job titles were changed from support. The word support was changed to control. And I think those two things meant we were regarded in a different way, and we kind of had more skin in the game, if for want of a better phrase, in terms of actually being regarded as something that adds value rather than somebody that provides support. So I think from management point of view, they were seeing a lot more return for what they wanted, whereas I think it took a little bit of time for kind of the PMs to get their heads around the fact that we were on a par with them and we were not there kind of as their admin support. But that has been the main problem, I think. That administrative perception, and it's a really hard balance because you still want to be providing them with support because you need to build that relationship, and you don't because you want things back from them, like we've talked about earlier. You're often asking for information, so if you can be supportive in any way, I think you should still do that. But your main objective is kind of the control and governance side of things. And that's taken a while for the industry to learn, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been quite fortunate in that I've worked for 3 companies that have been really kind of bought into what PMO is and what it's about. At Virgin Media, it was kind of really integral. A really integral part of delivery was the PMO, and making sure that things were capacity planned, delivered correctly, assured, all that kind of good stuff. They understood the value of actually planning out, having roadmaps and all that kind of stuff that obviously helped them plan and work out when they wanted to deliver certain changes to the television services they offer and all that kind of stuff, which is cool. So that was great. I think when I joined Secure Trust Bank, which is where we're at now, there was no PMO at all. So this was like 5 or 6 years ago. A lot of the senior management didn't really understand or hadn't really worked with the PMO in a capacity that we're at now, where we are kind of pretty integral and quite central in terms of working out all the kind of stuff we talked about, strategic change and that kind of stuff. Their perception, as Sally mentions, it was around, oh, so you're here you're going to take minutes for me in these meetings and stuff. And I was like, no, that's not what PMO is about. So it took the best part of a year or so, I think, to set up PMO as I kind of envisaged it, and how my manager envisaged it as well. And to take a bit of time to set that expectation about what it is that we do, and that we're not this admin function, and actually we can really help in terms of providing guidance and trends and analysis for project management and future changes as well.
No, I sort of didn't have a recognition of PMO until I became a BRM. So for sort of the seven years of my career has been to work with the PMO. And prior to that, I just don't think I kind of had that. They were on the radar really. But we kind of complement each other quite well. So if I'm surfacing new demand, this is why I think the topic's so important, because we know it's important to recognise that we're important allies to one another. So if I'm surfacing new demand, but there's another 6 other BRM surfacing demand as well, you know, you're in a prime position to help with the overall prioritizing of it, and to really sort of advise and guide me, which I can relay back to the business areas, as to when we can realistically start some of this work. An estimate of, you know, a rough sort of estimate of the cost that could be involved, the type of people that we would need and when. And that for me just, you know, makes us just look like such a professional outfit, you know, when it comes to the BRM, to have the PMO support us in that way. And, you know, I've had flavours of BRM where that hasn't been the case, and I've had to do a lot of the groundwork myself. Which is really difficult at times, because I'm literally having to go to different departments to understand and get that information. But because it's central, it makes our role just look so slick. You know, I could literally come back in maybe 4 or 5 weeks or something, once I've done the initial gathering as to what we want to do, then relay that in a way that would make it sort of understandable for PMO, and PMO created templates for us, and you know, and it was just really in a helpful way to then, and the feedback from you know, leaders and directors to say, I understand this, you know, you've created a really neat 8-page document, you've come back to me in the timeline that I would have expected, and you've sort of laid it out in such a clear way to say to me, out of 3 ideas that we want to go ahead with, you know, we think idea 2 should go ahead, and we'll think about 1 and 3 later. And that for me is just brilliant.
No, that's good that you've had that kind of positive experience. I think that's important. And yeah, I think you make a good point. And certainly you mentioned it earlier about the technical side of things. That actually you don't necessarily need any kind of technical, you know, skills from a previous job or anything like that. It's more a case of, if you've got the soft skills that we've talked about, and you're able to communicate with the IT teams and suppliers and BRMs and other people around the organization, if you're that kind of person, then it lends itself quite naturally to that. But that's good. I'm glad you had a nice experience, Jack. That's good.
Yeah. And then I think when you're sort of involved in a project or a program, it's great to see, again, every sort of steering meeting that I was going to, there's a member of PMO, maybe more than one member there, and I know that myself and those PMO people are agnostic to the politics of what's happening in the room, and we, again, I can see the information being relayed in a seamless way. And when I have those conversations with those business sponsors, it's almost like, as I said, you've done the important work of saying where, you know, potential overspend is happening, or where the project is starting to slow down, and that's going to cause an issue later on in the program. And then I get to help that sponsor or that project manager as well, to then sort of divert and understand what our options could be at that point. So it just really works in a really healthy way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, about the fact that we're agnostic, because we're not, you know, we are passionate about making sure that things are delivered properly, but we're not at that stage where we're so buried in the detail like a project manager is, or one of the suppliers is, that we would necessarily want to kind of influence the view of a project. We're just quite factual, really, in terms of what we're presenting.
Yeah. So I suppose if you had to summarize for, you know, a young professional who, and as you say, doesn't need an IT background for this role, so they could look for these roles online at job sites, and maybe speak to a recruiter directly and say, look, I'm interested in the world of project management. You know, how would you sort of perhaps encourage them, or say what would their sort of early doors sort of look like for them?
Sal, do you want to go?
Well, I'd start off by saying, really don't be put off by, like we said, the technical side of things. I think Tom would confirm that I'm not amazing in a technical capacity. So I think it's really, really important, those interpersonal skills. If you've got really good organizational skills, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but I think if you're a bit of a control freak and you like controlling things and having that kind of overarching view of things, definitely look into PMO, because there's, like we said, it can open loads of doors, and it's a constantly changing job. It can mean different things in different organizations, and it just gives you a real varied career. Like, we both really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I think we both started off as project support officers. I think is the general kind of role that you'll see on LinkedIn and on job boards and stuff. That tends to be almost like the entry into PMO, which is supporting projects and delivery. You're working at quite a granular level with the detail of a project. So that's kind of where both Sally and I started. Working on that kind of stuff, and through experience and being involved in things and learning from project managers that you think are good, and learning from project managers that maybe aren't so good, but you're learning and working out how you do things differently. Then you can kind of move into different parts of the PMO that suit you. Really, that tends to be the kind of way in. I think it's once you get into PMO, you'll be surprised. Like, when you start speaking to the people who work in PMO, we're all of a pretty similar mindset. I don't think there's many people that get into it and then don't kind of stick with it, because you have such a varied role. It's not like your day to day, like a PM. I think it's quite tough, because your day to day, you're buried in the detail of that project. If it's going well, then you feel good. If it's not going so well, then you've got a really tough time for a few weeks to try and work that stuff through. So we get a nice mix, I think, in PMO. Would be my advert if you wanted to get involved in it.
No, perfect.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think as well, just keep a lookout on like grad schemes. We've had quite a few grads come in, and they've really, the placements that they do in PMO, they've found really useful, because they are getting an insight into all of those different parts of the business, as well as like learning the skills that you need as well. So maybe go down that route.
Perfect. I completely agree with you. It's you learn lessons fast. If you're open to learning, you learn the good, the bad, and you never know as a starting point where it can really take you. It could take you into BRM, BA, PM. It could take you in any direction, because that knowledge that you obtain so quickly, because you've got access to all that data. So if you've got a couple of hours free, you're not in a meeting, go and have a look at the tools and the data that you've got, and really start to learn more about real change. So I think it's fantastic. Thank you for talking to me about this today. Really appreciate it, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Great. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks,
appreciate
Jack.
it.
Thank you. Right. So apologies for that earlier glitch. I think you could see all the screen, sort of windows and things. So apologise for that. And I was just wondering if we've had anything on the chat. So hopefully that was useful for you. And like I said, we've got Sally and Tom here as well. So if you do have any questions or comments. Tom and Sally, I don't know if you were able to follow the chat while the video was playing. Has there been interesting? Yeah,
we've had some good questions. Some ones around what's the difference between the manager role and the lead role in a PMO, which is quite a good question, because a lot of organizations kind of interchange the two roles. So you'll see a lot of job adverts for PMO leads or that type of role, and that would be more of a manager role. So I suppose the difference at Secure Trust Bank, is what I've kind of said on the chat response, is that manager role tends to be a slightly more strategic role, at a strategic level, working with more senior execs about where the business is going to go, where we're going to invest money, that kind of thing. So that's the difference there.
And also, just to carry on with that as well, Tom, I think it really is company specific, because also PMO means different things. Literally, some people talk about project management office, some people talk about program management office, and sometimes PMO even means portfolio management office. So I think it's just really important to kind of work out, if you're applying for a job, what does PMO actually mean in that company, because it can mean like different things.
Yeah, we also had a question about if you were going to start a PMO in a business, how would you go about doing that, which is a pretty big question, but a good one nonetheless. And I think, as I've kind of commented on the chat, it does really depend on what you've already got in the organization and what the setup is. If you've got project managers and that kind of stuff already in place. But one of the qualifications that's available or that you can do is from a PMO perspective is P3O, which is Projects, Portfolios, Programs Office, which is all about how to set up a PMO from scratch, which is great. And that was that's a course that I've done, and I think it's really, really useful. So
yeah,
if you
it's a
want to have
good
a look
course.
at that.
I think as well, I've been thinking about that question as well since it came up on the chat. I think just from a real simple point of view, just create a dashboard. So create a list of all your projects, when they started, when they're due to end, and who's working on them. You just need that central kind of hub of information. I think if you've got that, you can kind of go into meetings and you can do resource planning, you can talk about money, but you just need that central list with as much information on it as you can get. So like what department's it in, who's the sponsor, who's the PM, etc., etc. I think that's, for me, that was probably the starting point when in a previous role we set up a PMO, and I think that literally came from having this kind of, it was like an A3 piece of paper at this point with everything on it. Just because it's all about kind of center of information, center of excellence, knowing the stuff that you need to know. So I think just get it all in one place if you can.
Yeah.
And I think we've got there's an individual on here who's a PM as well, and sort of explained their experience. I think I can see. Yeah, good.
Yeah, some interesting points about perception as well. I think that I kind of mentioned that in the video about perception of PMO. And if you haven't kind of experienced that before, or you're kind of new to change, you don't really know what that's about, there certainly was a perception quite a while ago, and some project managers and other people still have this kind of perception that PMO is kind of there to do the support and administration type activities, but there's lots of other things that we do as well, and it's certainly shifted. I think businesses and companies have realized that actually there's a lot more they can do with PMOs in terms of helping them determine where they want to go in terms of change management and investment and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting stuff.
So yeah, if there's anyone who wants to ask any questions for myself or the team I've got today, please feel free to unmute and share your video if you like as well. That'd be great. But I did think we covered quite a lot in there as well. So, and as we said, it's quite far-reaching, the role. PMO get involved right through from tactical, small change projects to the bigger sort of strategic roadmap activity as well. So there's a lot of breadth there, a lot of learning you can do, and I think what a great place to start, because the actual PM role is very challenging. It can be quite a rocky road, I think, to get sort of headfirst into a PM role when perhaps you don't quite know how the teams all work together. But at least the PMO role, you're there, you've got your levels of responsibility and accountability, for sure, but you're, especially as an early career, you're learning so much. Your first 6 months really immersed into everything that's going on in that organization. And we're sort of identifying PMO as sitting within IT. Some organizations run departments which are called transformation, and you might find that PMO actually resides in there as well, rather than sort of strictly in IT. So don't always sort of make that assumption that it's purely in IT. It can be part of another engine within the organization, which typically can be called transformation as well.
Yep.
So
there's a good question that's just been asked actually. So would we say that PMs should sit under the PMO, or should the PMO stand alone? How does it work at Secure Trust? So yeah, good question. I've seen it work in different ways. So sometimes you have the PMs and the delivery managers and that kind of thing report into the PMO, which is how it was set up at Virgin Media. at Secure Trust, we're kind of an independent arm of IT and change. So we don't have, the PMs don't report into us as such, but we do have kind of a direct link to them. So they have their own line managers and stuff. That's the kind of setup at Secure Trust, but I've seen it work both ways fairly successfully. But I think it helps being, from a PMO perspective, from our perspective, I think it helps being more independent and slightly separated from the project managers directly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think as well, the PMO is usually a dotted line into either a program manager or a head of, because it gives you a bit of seniority then in terms of when you need things from the PMs, kind of gives you a bit more teeth, should we say.
James has also asked, what do you think about the PMO role in startup companies? When would you think a dedicated person is required? That's a good question. Sal, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think, well, I'd say from the start, really, if you've got the resource, because I think especially at startup, I mean, when you say startup companies, I suppose from our point of view, we'd see that as the start of a program. And I think from that point of view, the PMO is key, really, to get everything kind of up and running. Would you agree with that, Tom?
Yeah, I think if it's a kind of a startup company, as a brand new company, you want someone who's kind of thinking in that mold of where are we going to invest and where is change going to happen, and have we got the right people to deliver this change? Something that I talked about a couple of weeks ago on some training I was doing was about grand designs. Don't know if anyone watches grand designs, but you'll find that they tend to start off with someone who's never done any kind of project management at all in their lives, and suddenly they're going to build a new house and they're the project manager. They don't have any training and they've got no experience of it. And yet they're somehow supposed to just be able to adapt. And you always find the same things happen. You know, they run out of money, it goes over time, always the same sort of stuff happens. I think if you're starting up a new company, it's not a million miles away from starting something from scratch, like building a house. And you need someone to be able to do that piece, manage it, and think about the risks and what could happen, and also how to control it properly. So I think in terms of dedicated person, and at Secure Trust Bank, we didn't create our PMO until 2015. And when I joined in 2015, there was maybe 3 or 4 project managers already in the organization, but there was no real kind of governance structure around it. So you can operate without, but to Sally's point, I'd say as soon as you can, get someone to kind of do that, especially if your company is going to be doing a lot of expanding in terms of change and projects and stuff. That's a good question.
Yeah, wish there would be in a startup, wouldn't there, Tom? There'd be a lot going on, you know, multiple work streams going on there. So you need that sort of, and as you said, the key word there is, you know, we use the word agnostic, but independent, that kind of independent person to say, logically, here's what we can and can't really do. So.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that in the video as well about being agnostic and being independent is quite important. I can understand why companies and businesses have spent more time investing in PMOs, because we don't really have as I kind of mentioned in the video, I don't want to go over it again, but we don't really have like kind of a bias view of things. We'll go in quite factually based on this is how the project's performing, or this is how this person's performing, and this is where we need to go with it, and put recommendations in. And I think businesses are realizing that's actually quite good, because you get a much more transparent view of what's actually going on, rather than maybe a project manager's view, which is like, it's going pretty well, but actually there's a lot of stuff that they are desperately trying to, you know, keep moving.
Or a business lead who's got maybe interests in just getting things over the line, when actually, is it still the right thing to be doing? So we just kind of take away that bias.
Yeah. Claire's asked, how many people do you have in your PMO and what the roles are there? How many projects do you typically have in progress? There's only 2 of us, just me and Sally.
This is the PMO.
Yeah, this is us. There are there's other PMOs around the organization as well, of like dotted around 1 or 2 people in each of those sections. But in terms of central, in terms of strategic change and stuff like that, it's Sally and I who are in the PMO. You'll find that other organizations, there will be all sorts of different roles within a PMO. So we mentioned about the PMO manager and lead role and how they kind of interchange, or maybe advertised by different organizations being interchangeable. You'll find that, as David's pointed out in the chat, PMO teams are created on large projects and programs. We've seen that in the past as well. So if you've got something enormous, big piece of change, think of maybe HS2 or something giant that's going on in the world right now. You've got a specific PMO team that are created solely to get through that program, to make that program move and make sure it's delivering to governance.
And in a program of that size, you'd have a benefits manager, you'd have a designated planner, you'd have PMO support, you'd have a designated risk person. You know, you'd have people that really specialize in those areas, whereas we cover everything. And I think largely, you know, companies do have people that tend to cover most aspects of PMO, unless they are really, really big. In terms of number of projects, how many projects have we got, Tom, at the moment? Quite a few, aren't we?
I'd say centrally through our team, there's about 20 in flight, but we have a lot of different small changes going on around the organization, which we also do the governance and auditing and assurance for as well. So there's quite a lot of change. When I was at Virgin Media, I'll just touch on that. I was working in like the data PMO, so I was kind of heading up that. And at one point when I joined, we had 215 projects on, and there was just me controlling that kind of data arm of the PMO, of the change management area. So you can kind of
it can be as broad,
yeah.
But I think then the services you provide are obviously a lot more limited.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of I'm one person, so this is what you can get. But that's another beauty of the role. You know, you can shape it into what is manageable. I've got another question.
We've got one question just sent directly as well. So it's a really good question on obviously a current challenge we're facing is what are the main challenges that the PMO role has had to sort of manage during this pandemic. So that rush for remote working and getting people set up ready to go, you know, kit or anything that's sort of really come sort of left hook to the PMO.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think Sally's probably best place to answer because she actually joined our PMO or our organization just as we went into lockdown. So literally in March last year.
Yeah, so I haven't met, I'd say 70% of our team, even though I've been working at the organization for nearly a year now. But obviously, you know, technology being what it is these days, that hasn't actually caused too many issues. I think, you know, from my point of view, from a personal perspective, joining at that point, the main challenge that I found, and I know this is veering off the question a little bit, was around not really knowing the makeup of the company and not knowing who works for who and who's the senior person, and, you know, don't speak to him on a Wednesday because he's never in a good mood, etc., etc. You don't ever get that kind of the cultural stuff when you're sat behind a screen. You know, in terms of kind of setting up home working and that kind of impact, we've been quite lucky at the bank because we have got the IT guys that kind of did sort all that out for us, didn't they, Tom? And we've also got a really strong facilities team.
I know at other organizations they've had a lot of difficulties getting that moving and getting people working from home because they've been so office based or site based. So yeah, I can imagine that could be quite tough if you're in the PMO. So the question, as part of end-to-end projects, sometimes procurement is required. Does your process allow for checks and balances in line with procurement rules, especially when third-party vendors are being engaged with PMs? Yeah, so we have a whole separate procurement team department which look after that, and they kind of link in with us, and a lot of the due diligence and controls that we have in place around supplier selection is all kind of tied into that. So at the beginning of a project, we start to do that work with procurement and make sure that the vendors that we're selecting are actually going to deliver what we want, rather than them just kind of coming on and saying, yes, we can do everything.
And I do a monthly health check on the projects, and a key question within those health checks is, have you got evidence of your due diligence being done for this? Because as Tom said earlier, we work for a bank and we have to be really, really careful with stuff like that. It's a very, very risk averse kind of company.
Yeah, and that's, I think the beauty of PMO is, depending on what role you really get, you are linking into those other departments. So you've got a procurement task as your role, you then link into the central procurement team for the organisation. If you've got a finance, you're assigned some work around finance, you're working with central finance. So you really do bridge, and you start to learn about how these other departments work within the business.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So,
and then one of those departments might have an area of interest for you. You know,
yeah.
I quite like the numbers. Tom hates the numbers, so I work more closely with finance, and I'm kind of like the finance change partner. So you can kind of, you know, get an insight into those departments. So you might be looking for a role in the future, and you might look in those areas, and you've already got some experience of it, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and obviously being a bank, you know, you said regulatory changes, so there's a central risk and regulatory department, and you'll get to understand what changes are affecting your industry, what's sort of coming your way, and it depends if you've got kind of that mind where you want to understand what the future direction of the business is. Like I said, you've got it all in one place. It's an incredible place to be. And if you're a young professional, you do start at an organisation, keep your eyes and ears out for PMO. You know, go and spend half a day, maybe more. It's blown my mind that it's just the two of you, by the way. It's just secure trust bank to be doing all of that. But so if you are a graduate and you've joined maybe as a software developer, go and spend some time with the PMO people. Like they said, you know, they're all of a similar ilk, similar mindset, and I'm sure they would appreciate the company, especially these two, I think. So I'm just going to another slide just to really round up what we've been discussing today, and hopefully we can see that. So hopefully you can all see that. That's just going into what we've really talked about today, just really rounding off some of the organisational benefits that this department brings and what makes a good PMO. So organisation, time management, attention to detail. Like I said, there's a whole mixed bag that you could dive into in PMO. If you do get on the phone to a recruiter, inquire about that business, you know, inquire about Virgin's PMO team if there's opportunities there, inquire about some of the local businesses in your area potentially that you're looking to join, and say, do they have a project management office function? Do they have any roles there, you know? And you know, you might find your route in there. And like I said in the previous talk, it's really about getting your foot through the door, you know, when you start an organisation, and then start your sort of progress from there, really. And another some really important skills there, just being human, just able to build those interpersonal skills, and really start to understand how your role impacts other teams, other departments within the organisation, and how you can bring about positive change regarding those projects that are run within that portfolio.
I would say if anyone's got any specific questions or they want to get in touch, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'm happily connect, and if you've got any questions or you want to have a chat about anything or your career or anything that you want to talk about, I'm quite happy to do that.
Me too.
Perfect. And likewise myself, so my details are there as well, so you can contact me on LinkedIn or join my Instagram page. And thank you so much for Tom and Sally to say that they're also there, contactable, should you want to ask any more questions or get any advice. And I'll pass on to David, but thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jack.
Perfect. Thanks, Jag. Thanks, Tom, Sally. I think that was a really good talk. Thank you very much. I think the theme there was there is a lot of variety, and there is a lot to look out for out there. So if you've got any interest, then take this in mind. This session has been recorded. It will be on YouTube in the BCS YouTube playlist and their web channel shortly. It goes through some processing, so you will find it. I think you will all get an email with a link to the playlist where you'll be able to pick up on the previous two sessions and also then come back for future sessions. As Jake mentioned, there's a session every 2 weeks running up till the 8th of May. So please do book onto those. You'll find them on in the BCS website under the Birmingham branch. I'm the chair of the Birmingham branch, as Jake said. Tom, not this Tom, but my co-chair we'd all love to see you booking back on. Now, if I could, if everyone's happy to unmute, and we usually show appreciation to our guest, our speakers and guest speakers by giving them a round of applause. So if you're all happy to do so, please do put your thanks in the chat as well. But please do join me in thanking our speakers.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Perfect. I've just got some slides to show you as we break. I do wish everyone a pleasant afternoon, and please do come back again and watch this show, watch the previous shows, and watch our future shows too. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.